So guys, let's finish up the last discussion on joints. So we have discussed already the fibrous and cartilaginous joint, and now it's a time for a synovial joint. So a synovial joint is known as synovial because it has it comes from two words actually: the sign, which means with, and ovum, which means egg. So it's actually known as because of the presence of egg white like material within this the synovial joint. So just as we said previously that the synovial joint, they are known to have a joint cavity, and a joint cavity is a characteristic feature of a synovial joint. A joint cavity or a synovial cavity is a characteristic feature of a synovial joint. So the synovial joint, the primary function of the synovial joint is to reduce friction between the articulating bones, So in this synovial joint, the articulating bone, they are separated by a joint cavity or a synovial cavity. And as we said again, they are freely movable joints. They are freely mobile joints, and they are also known as diarthrosis. Diarthrosis for plural and diarthrosis for a singular one. So they are considered to be the body's main functional joint. The main functional means the main movable joint, the main freely movable joints, and they are for locomotion, and typically near all the limbs they have got these synovial joints, from the fingers and the knees, the shoulder joint, the elbow joints. They're all synovial joint. So it's also important to discuss the joint structure of a synovial cavity. It's important to discuss the joint structure of a synovial joint. So a synovial joint, being a joint, means there should always be the articulating joint bonds. The bones start to come together to form these joints. So these are the articulating bonds. But what is the important characteristic feature of a synovial joint? Is the presence of a joint cavity or the synovial cavity. Don't you forget about that one. Okay, so we have the joint cavity or the synovial cavity, whereby the articulating bones, they don't get into contact with one another because of the presence of the synovial fluid and the synovial cavity, which contain the synovial fluid, and the function of the synovial fluid is to reduce friction between the articulating bonds. But also we have a joint, the articular capsule, a joint capsule. The joint capsule is actually, this is the joint capsule. It has got two layers. The outer layer of a fibrous material, and the inner layer. So the outer layer of the fibrous membrane of the articular articular capsule, is actually connecting the articulating bonds. You see, it covers the synovial cavity, but it also joins it brings together the articulating bones. So this bone and this bone are bound together by the articular capsule, but the fibrous membrane of the articular capsule. It has got also the inner layer. This inner layer is actually made up of synovial membrane. So the synovial membrane makes the inner layer of the articular capsule, and the synovial membrane is also known as the synovium, and the function of the synovium is actually to secrete the synovial fluid. So the synovial fluid is produced by the cells that are found within the synovial membrane. And then we see the inner layer of the articular capsule is in continuation with the articular cartilage. Okay, so the articulating bone are actually covered by articular cartilage. For example, you see this is the bone, and this we have a cartilage here, and this cartilage is hyaline cartilage. But presence of hyaline cartilage does not press this joint into the cartilaginous joint. Why? Because of the presence of the joint cavity. So we have a joint cavity in between the bones, and this is actually the characteristic feature of a synovial joint. So this cartilage is actually here, but it does not connect the bones, the articulating bones. So it only covers the articulating bone, but does not connect the articulating bones together. Okay, so that was synovial. That was a joint articular cartilage, which is hyaline cartilage. But as we said, we have the synovial cavity is covered by the synovial fluid. It is known as synovial because it resembles to the raw egg white, which has almost the same characteristics as the synovial fluid. And the synovial fluid, one among the obvious functions of the synovial fluid is reducing the friction between the articulating bones, to make sure that you are moving freely with no friction. Okay, so otherwise, because these are the free movable joints, so they would make friction big time friction. Okay, because they almost all the time make movement. So the synovial fluid is there to reduce the friction, to make sure these joints last for a long period of time. Okay. And then we know that the synovial fluid it contains some nutrients and chemical environments important for the joint growth. So we know the articular cartilage. This articular cartilage is it's a vascular. It does not have blood supply. So the nutrients and the oxygen are all coming from the synovial fluid. The synovial fluid also provides a chemical environment for the joint. The chemical environment, the nutrients, the oxygen, and all that's synovial fluid. So let's now discuss about the types of the synovial joint. So we have more like 6 types of the synovial joint. This is actually what made me to make a separate video on the synovial joint. Okay, so the very first type of the synovial joint is a plain joint. It's a plain joint. The plain joint is actually made by the flat articular surfaces. The plain articular surfaces. So most of the time they are plain, or they are flat, or they can be slightly covered to differentiate from other types of a joint. Okay, so the primary activity of a plain joint is side to side movement. Side to side movement can be in this direction, or can be in this direction, or can be in. That's why we say it can be biaxial or triaxial. The movements can be in these different planes. So can sliding movement. Okay, the sliding movement. Okay, so sometimes the joints may also rotate. The bones may also rotate, as you can see here, because they are flat. So they are flat. So we can have this movement. Which is already biaxial, but it can be, a rotational movement between the articulating joints. An example, the joint that is formed in the tarsal bones. The tarsal bones is a plain joint. So the second type of the synovial joint is the pivot joint. And the pivot joint is formed between one bone and the cylindrical end of another bone. So this is the first bone. This one is the first bone, and this other bone, it makes the cylindrical end. So the joint is actually between this bone and this bone, and as you can see, the movements here will only be like kind of rotational movement, because there are no other ways that the movement can be brought in this pivot joint. So They always know the movement is only unaxial. So unaxial only in one axis, which is rotational movement. Example is the proximal radial ulnar joint, the joint between radius, the head of radius, and the ulna. You see the radius is the first bone, and then there is an annular ligament, which makes the cylindrical portion of the joint, and so that the head of radius will rotate within the annular ligament, and that's an example of a pivot joint. But we also have a joint between a joint between the first and second cervical vertebrae, the axis and atras, and this joint is actually, you see, it's pivot joint, which means it allows only rotational movement, and this is the example when you are signifying no. So when you are signifying no by your head, you are what actually makes this movement possible is the rotation of the dens along the annular ligament and that part of a bone. So the third type with hinge joint, I think you already know hinge joint, and it's known as hinge because of these a bawaba, like, we have these Swahili doors that have bawaba. Okay, yeah, so they are known as hinge because of this characteristic feature that they are opening in one direction. So a hinge joint is articulation between a convex end of one bone and the concave edge of another bone. So it's actually a joint between a convex end. So this one is the convex end and a concave edge of another one. But as we know, this joint is actually uniaxial. It allows movement in only one axis. For example, extension and flexion. This movement is only in one axis, and so the elbow joint is one among the hinge joint. The elbow joint is one among the hinge joint. Okay, so we have some other joints, for example. So you see, we have the convex end and the concave edge of the other bone that makes the hinge joint. But also the knee joint is also a hinge joint because it allows movement in only one direction. So extension and flexion, and it's because we have the convex end and a near concave edge. So the fourth type of synovial joint is condyloid joint. So it's a condyle-like. You see, remember I told you, if you see oid, it means like. So a condyle means knuckle. So a condyloid joint is a knuckle-like joint. So what is so special about, it's also known as ellipsoid joint. What's so special about a condyloid joint? So a condyloid joint actually is a little bit complicated, but you'll be fine. It's a joint between a convex oval. Remember the hinge joint is also a joint between a convex end and a concave edge. But this condyloid is a convex oval, not the convex regular shape, but convex oval shaped projection of one bone and the oval shaped depression of another. So for example, you see this one is a convex edge, but it's a convex, but an oval convex, and then we'll have the depression, the oval depression, which is the concave or oval depression of the other bone, that makes this. So the movement in these condyloid joints actually biaxial. Biaxial is like, you know, it can rotate within the joint. So the four possible movements in the condyloid joints: the extension, flexion, and abduction and adduction. Example, the knuckles, okay, because I said the condyle means knuckle, so condyloid, the knuckle-like joint, okay. So a knuckles formed by the distal metacarpals and the proximal phalanges. The distal metacarpal and the proximal phalanges. So here, these joints are actually the condyloid joint. All right, so let's now talk about the saddle. The saddle joint. The saddle joint is been a little bit complicated, a little bit hard to understand, but you'll be fine. You will be fine. So a saddle joint is formed between two bones. One bone is convex in one direction and at the same time concave in another direction. Okay, so it's a convex in one direction and a concave in another direction. For example, this bone, the top one is convex in this direction, but convex means in Swahili means, you know, binoko, convex, and like, you know, projection, and then concave in this direction. You see, this one is like a little bit depressed, like in Borneo. So we have binoko on one, you know, convex on one direction, convex in this direction, but concave on this direction. So it has convex and the concave in the same bone, and then the other articulating bone also behaves the same. It has convex in this direction and the concave in this direction. Okay, it's a little bit complicated, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Okay, it's like someone sits on the motorcycle. Someone sits on the motorcycle. It's like forming this kind of a joint. So you can try to imagine that one. All right. So as we have said, it's a joint between two saddle bones, saddle-shaped bones, which are concave in one direction and convex in another. So as I've told you, this one is the convex in this direction, the concave in this one. This bone is because this one is already concave in this direction. This one should be convex in this direction, but it should be concave in that direction. So that's a saddle joint, and the saddle joint is a biaxial because you see, it's something like this. So there's movement between this one. I mean, this bone can come here and there, but also this bone can come here and there. So we have like biaxial. So this can move between, and this can move in that order, in that direction. So a joint between trapezium, the joint between trapezium and the first metacarpal. You see this joint here, and you can zoom in and see like this joint, this bone. It is convex in this direction but concave in this direction, and the other one the other way. So the opposable thumb is critical for complex hand motions. Thrombosis by any mechanism severely limits the hand function, we know. So this bone, this saddle joint here is actually what makes the movement of the thumb even possible. So the last one, the ball and socket joint. You all know the ball and socket, and this is a joint between a head of one bone, which acts as a ball, and a depression of another bones, which acts as a socket. Okay, so that's where it's a ball and socket. It's articulation in between a rounded head of one bone, which is known as a ball, which behaves like a ball, and a concavity of another bone, which behaves like a socket, bone and socket. So the important ball and socket joint in the human body are these two: the shoulder joint and the hip joint. The shoulder joint and the hip joint. And these the ball and socket joint, they allow movement in all directions. So the movement in all directions, so it's actually metaxium. The movement in all directions, flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and rotational movements, they are all possible within ball and socket joint. Ball and socket joint. So the important ones, or the only ball and socket joint in the human body, is the radial on the shoulder joint, and the hip joint. Okay. Oh, so you see, we said we have a head and then we have a socket. But you see, in the shoulder joint, the socket is very shallow. Which means that this head can most of time dislocate, can most of time slide from the cavity, and it forms it's one among the reasons why the shoulder joint is very unstable, very unstable, and it's prone to dislocation. Why? Because the socket is very shallow, and the bone, the shoulder is actually highly mobile. It moves freely, unlike the hip joint. The higher the mobility of the joint, the less the stability of that joint. The higher the mobility of the joint, the less the stability of the joint. So hip joint, on the other end, is of course it's a ball and socket. It allows the metaxial movement, but it is less mobile compared to the shoulder joint, and so it's highly stable compared to the shoulder joint. We don't dislocate the shoulder joint, the hip joint, most of the time, like how we do with the shoulder joint. So we have covered all the parts of this synovial of the joint, the fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial joint. And maybe we can talk about the innervation of a joint. The innervation of a joint. So the innervation of a joint is governed by the Hilton's law, and the Hilton's law it states that the articular nerves supplying a joint are the branches of the nerve supplying the muscles responsible for moving that joint, which also supplies the overlying skin. So the skin that's covered by the joint, that covers the joint. So the nerves that will supply the joints are the branch from the nerves that will supply the muscles around the joint. This nerve will also supply the skin around the joint. You see? Yeah, the skin around the joint. Okay, so we haven't talked anything about the nerves at this point, so it doesn't make sense to tell you which kind of nerve this is. But I know we'll be referring to this Hilton's law as we are moving with the course, So the nerves that supply the joints are known as the articular nerves, or the articular branches of a certain nerve. And the articular nerve irritation can cause a reflex muscular spasm. Why? Because we have said the nerves that will supply the joints are actually the branches of the nerve that will supply the muscles. So we have irritation, we have like a reciprocal a reflex muscular spasm, reciprocal transmission of information that can cause the muscular spasm. And sometimes, because we've said as well that the joint, the skin, the nerve that supply the joint will also give some branch to supply the skin. So sometimes we'll have a referred pain. Why? Because we can have something like irritation within the joint, and the pain will be felt somewhere on the skin, because they share the same innervation, the same nerve fibers, and that's what we call the referred pain. So what about the vasculature of a joint? Well, the joint receives blood from articular arteries that arise from vessels around the joint. For example, this is the shoulder joint. This is the shoulder joint. The shoulder joint, I mean, we had like an artery that was going to supply the other part of the arm, but it gives branch to supply the skin, to supply the joint. So actually the joint are rich in blood supply, and they have like alternative blood supply, which we call anastomosis. Why? This is because when you for example, I'm giving you an example. When you are flexing, you see we have this artery over here, okay, that was going to supply the lower part of the arm, the lower part of the forearm, okay. So we have a reciprocal communication here. We have like alternative communication, because sometimes we flex our arms, and by flexing the arm, you see the position of this artery. So this artery is somewhere here. So when you flex the arm, this artery is broken. So once this artery is blocked over here, means the distal portion will get lack of blood supply, and will undergo necrosis or death. Okay, so to avoid that, the joints have got the alternative blood supply, like the alternative channels that will ensure that the blood will be supplied even in times of blockage of a certain vessels. Same applied to all other joints in the human body. So that's the arteries, but the veins, they accompany these arteries. So we have this like the same thing in veins, So another important thing to talk about is the bursa or a tendon, the bursa and the tendon sheath. Bursa and a tendon sheath. So a brusa in Italian or other these Romanian languages, it means a purse, a purse like a bag. Okay, so it's a bag. So it's a sack-like structure that is strategically present in certain joints to alleviate frictions. For example, in a shoulder joint, we have this bursa, and in the knee joint also we have this bursa. What the primary function, function of this bursa is to prevent friction between the articulating bones. So they are not really strictly part of the synovial joint, but they resemble the joint capsule, because their walls are made of fibrous membrane, as we have seen in the articular sheath, articular capsule. So they are filled with the fluid. They are filled with the fluid, which is almost the same as the synovial fluid, That's a bursa. And then we have a tendon sheath. A tendon sheath is a bursa-like. It's something like a bursa. It's a tendon sheath. It's a bursa-like. This one is a tendon sheath. You see, it encircles the tendon. With the same intention of reducing friction between the tendons and other parts of the other rigid part like bones. So it's a tube-like bursa that wrap around the tendons, experiencing considerable friction on all the sides. So it covers all the tendons on either sides to allow to reduce the friction. Same applies as how the bursa behaves. So it protects all the sides of the tendon from friction within the tunnel. For example, you see this tendons of this flexor digitorum mass, but also you see here this is the tendon of biceps, a long head of biceps brachii, because it goes through the tunnel and it goes all the way in this direction. It is covered by a tendon sheath to make sure that it does not wears off from the by the action on the bones. All right, so the last thing in our discussion is the range of motion. So the range of motion of a joint is the ability of a joint to allow movement. So range of motion is like the degree of freedom of a joint, a degree of freedom of a joint. The joints have different degrees of freedom. They have different degrees of freedom. Some joints are like they allow the wide range of movement. Some are even limited and all that. And then the range of motion is affected by different pathology. Someone has got maybe inflammation of a joint. The range of motion will be reduced in such situations and all that. So in case of question, addition, or comment, don't forget to write me an email, but you can also follow me in this platform, TikTok, Instagram. You can subscribe in YouTube to make sure you get the contents like this every time we release these content. So that's it from the joint. See you next time. Ciao ciao.